On this week's video, we're still in quarantine. If you caught last week's video, you know that the Dark Void has contracted the horrible Rolling Rock virus. And things are getting a little bit worse in here. And I'm in quarantine for several weeks talking about movies that have to do with viral outbreaks. And this week we are talking about Cabin Fever. It's an unusual franchise. They took a very, very unusual turn, and we're going to take a look to see how that all adds up. And if their continuity works, or if it rots like the flesh of the characters. The virus began to spread back in 2002 with Cabin Fever, the directorial feature debut of Eli Roth. A group of friends go to a cabin, and it's Sean Hunter, Penelope, Areola, James DeBello, and Joey Kern here and his hairline, and their truck sports a license plate that expires in September of '02, so that's most likely our year, since earlier in the movie, they were excited about not having any more finals, so it's safe to assume that this is the late spring of '02. Things happen.
So wait, you like me now? Is this like a date?
Don't be gay.
That's the opposite of gay, lady. Bert comes across a sick guy in the woods, yet doesn't feel the need to tell his friends about this encounter for literally no reason. A guy who was bleeding from his eyeballs was trying to get to their cabin, and Bert had to shoot at him to get him to go away, and he just tells his friends he saw a squirrel. Eli himself shows up with a soul patch, and then the hobo shows back up and spews blood everywhere, so they set him on fire, and he ends up in the local water supply, which runs right to the cabin. Deputy Winston shows up, and Karen is the first to be infected, and they just lock her outside and take their time trying to find help. They all just sit around the cabin, and they're close enough to civilization that there's other houses around. I mean, people heard the commotion the previous night and called the police, but they only go to one house and get scared off and then just kind of decide to sit tight. Bert has it too, but of course doesn't tell everyone because, well, I guess he just doesn't. Then there's the whole Dennis Kung Fu pancake thing, which I'm sure some people think is funny. And then his dad tells Bert where the hospital was, but he doesn't go straight there. Then, when Paul discovers a body in the water, he has to lean in and poke it with a stick. Why he does this is a complete mystery. I guess he just needs to make sure that it's the drifter. Does it really matter what dead body is in the water? Why are you even sticking around here anyway? Marcy has it, but before it gets too bad, she's eaten by a dog, who then also eats Karen because this dog is freaking hungry. I guess I should point out that he, fully eats Marcy in 2 minutes because there's nothing left of her body anywhere. Paul reacted to her scream, so only a minute or so should have gone by. Paul puts Karen out of her misery, and the town people come to kill the kids through a pretty odd series of circumstances and shoot Bert. But Paul gets the upper hand on them. He's infected though, and infects some other people, but is eventually caught. Jeff shows back up, alive and uninfected, but for some reason starts to celebrate surviving, even though he's literally in the same exact situation he was in a day ago, and is shot by police. We end with the revelation that Winston dumped Paul by the water, further infecting the town. It actually took them 7 years to make a sequel, and it wasn't until 2009's Cabin Fever 2, Spring Fever, that we saw more of the story. It picks up immediately after the ending of the last one, and Paul is not as dead as he looked, but he's immediately hit by a bus and killed. Winston's back, although his hair is substantially longer than it was a day or two ago, so we're still in 2002 here, and we're at a high school, and they say that there's 5 weeks left in school, so they must run late if in the first film they were done with finals, and these guys still have 5 weeks left. It's a little off, but it is possible, so it's not too egregious of a time error. Larry Fessenden shows up, and can I just sidebar to say what a weird body of work this guy has? Seriously, look him up on IMDb, you have heard of him. People are already feeling the effects of the virus, and the tainted water ends up in the prom punch. We've got a real problem here as this license plate shows an expiration date, and I can't quite read the year, but I think it's 2006 or 2008, but it's definitely not a 2002. Oddly enough, it's a fake plate since there's no family state, so let's just chalk it up to a sticker issue and keep this as 2002. Judah Friedlander shows up, and the school ends up on lockdown at prom as masked agents with guns show up, while at the same time the virus kicks in and people start spewing blood everywhere. It's weird because lots of them just contracted the virus just like an hour ago from the punch, but Alex, who got it a lot earlier that day, is still pretty intact. Mark Borchardt makes an appearance, and the soldiers kill everyone at the school, and when John gets the virus, he cuts off his hand to stop it, although his stump is vaguely the shape and length of his actual hand. He eventually is taken in by the soldiers, and Cassie escapes with Winston, but she's infected, and it's worth noting that although this one is directed by Ty West, who made some great stuff, he actually denounces this film and wanted to have his name taken off of it. There was another time jump, and it wasn't until 2014, 5 years later, that we saw Cabin Fever Patient Zero, billed as a prequel to the original film. We started an isolated test site where they're holding Patient Zero, Samwise Gamgee. Meanwhile, this group of young adults head out on an island trip before Marcus's big wedding. The island, of course, is not as deserted as they had hoped, though, because the facility is there, and they get infected by swimming in the water. Meanwhile, things go wrong with Porter, and I'm not sure that this lab uniform is standard. Everyone ends up in the installation, and by this point, everything there is chaos, although these people kinda act more like zombies than we've seen before, so it's probably a different strain of the virus since it's from Patient Zero. Everyone pretty much acts like jerks to each other, and it comes down to Mangled Penny versus the Faceless Doctor, and I've noticed in these movies that I guess the virus reduces pain, because if your skin were being torn apart, you'd most likely be in a ton of pain, but everyone seems more frightened over the consequences than they are of the actual process. They both die, and there's a face-off on the beach with the nefarious Dr. Edwards, with Porter shooting him. Porter, Camila, and Marcus escape on a boat, and it's revealed that Porter is evil and plans to infect the world as he heads to the mainland. Now, there's no date in this one, but it's obviously before the first film, and with how fast the infection seems to spread, and the fact that Porter says that he's headed to North Carolina, he probably touches down near North Carolina to start the outbreak there, so this is most likely earlier in 2002, setting all three films in the same year. So there were plans for a fourth film to be shot back-to-back, and the next one taking place on a cruise ship, but in 2016 they instead took a different tactic. Instead, they made Cabin Fever, a remake of the first film using the same script and a different director. How do two different directors interpret the same story? Let's find out! Oh dear. It's the same intro. Kids on the way to the woods, and things play out pretty much in the same way, although they've dropped the humor and quirkiness of the townsfolk. New Bert mentions games that came out in 2012 and 2013, so we're definitely no longer set in 2002 like the original, and they've updated to include mentions of cell phone usage. Again, things pretty much go exactly the same, although they eliminated the best line of the film.
A doctor, like a physician or a professor?
Yeah, he's a professor. Of being a dog?
Psychiatrist or pediatrician? A little of both, I guess.
Not an improvement. Deputy Winston is pretty different, and they cast Louise Linton here, who obviously looks like a small backwater town resident, sure. During the big car chase scene, we get a quick glimpse of a license plate, and it expires April of 2014. Since this is once again set in the tail end of the school year, it's either just expired and it's 2013, or it's more likely up to date and we're set in the late spring of 2013. One big change is that the hermit isn't dead in the water and instead lunges at Paul and pulls him in, which I guess is better than Paul stupidly falling in on him, but doesn't make any more sense really. He was just sitting in the water all day. They change Karen's death scene as Paul just can't seem to properly kill her and sets her on fire, a notoriously slow and painful way to die. Nice going, Paul.
The confrontation with the hillbillies is like 3% different, but mostly the same stuff, and ends pretty much the same way, just blander. There's this mid-credits scene as well that I don't know what to make of, since it's like a classmate of theirs looking at Facebook photos of the carnage and events of the film. I mean, never mind who uploaded these pictures, who the hell took them? This is a close-up of Paul killing Karen. There was clearly no one there with a camera. It's just really, really nonsensical.
So there you have it. It's 4 movies with a really, really odd timeline. The first 3 movies actually kind of work in terms of how they relate to each other. I would say that all 3 movies basically take place in a time span of a week or so? A month at most, because, I mean, the prequel definitely takes place very quickly before the first film. So that's all really, really condensed in terms of a time frame. And then, of course, you have the remake, which is probably the most unnecessary remake in the history of remakes. And I gotta tell you, I'm not a fan of Eli Roth. I don't really care for his movies, but I will say that the remake actually showed that the first movie, what really worked in that one, was his personal touches, his quirkiness and the humor of the situations. Actually made that movie a little bit more than a standard movie. I don't really care for the first Cabin Fever 2 terribly much, but that actually did show that his take on it was better, so even if I don't think he's that great, he definitely was better than what followed. The other Cabin Fever movies are fairly forgettable. None of these movies are that great. None of them are terrible, except for maybe the remake, which is just terrible in the fact that it is so bland. It's completely unnecessary. And if you're watching these movies, if you've never seen the original Cabin Fever movie and you watch the remake, that'll be fine. If you just watched the first Cabin Fever movie and then you're watching the remake within the same day like I did, it feels really hard to watch. So, if you feel differently, let me know down below. If you thought that the remake was better than the original, let me know down below. And also consult your doctor on that one because you're crazy. And let me know what else you thought of this video. And also maybe send me tips for surviving this terrible plague that is happening right here. This Rolling Rock thing is out of control and I don't know what to do. But, of course, like, subscribe, do the Patreon thing. These guys are my patrons over here. Thank you for them. Thank you for the virus for not affecting this screen so you guys can see all these guys' names. And also, like last week, in all seriousness, please take this thing seriously. We don't have to panic, but let's take it very seriously. Let's make sure that we're not spreading to people outside. I know that a lot of you watching this are saying that the virus is not going to affect me, but please be conscious of the people that it will affect and not be out there spreading viruses. And then I'll see you next week for probably another virus video, unless we can cure this thing. So, see you then.